Hey y'all, my name is Cassie and I'm the creator of Pieces of Scrap, and in today's video we're going to be doing another free amigurumi pattern review, and these are patterns that I found on YouTube. And I'm really excited to do this because mainly I really like to review patterns that, you know, when you purchase a pattern on Etsy or something like that, you can see all the reviews about whether or not somebody actually likes that pattern. So the reason I like doing these pattern review videos is so that when you guys see them, you can make the decision about whether or not they are worth your time to make yourself. So before we get into it, I always like to go over how I determine the rating for these patterns. So first off, would I use the pattern again in the future? This really comes down to the overall picture of that pattern. Is it easy to understand? Do I like what it looks like at the end? And so on. Number two is, can I understand the pattern easily? And I always come back to this one because I would like to return to a pattern whether I'm a beginner crocheter or if I am an advanced crocheter. It's nice to have thorough written instructions as well as photos and diagrams that help explain what you're supposed to do in the pattern. That way, if you have any questions, they hopefully get answered in the pattern itself instead of having to reach out to the pattern designer or troubleshoot in the comments trying to figure out what something is supposed to mean. On screen are some examples of patterns that do this really well. They're really good at using diagrams, explaining complicated stitches that you might not know, or some sort of stitch that maybe even the author came up with. Things of that nature to make understanding the pattern easier. And number three is, do I like the final product? And this really comes down to if it's cute, it matches what the pictures described it to be, or if it's just one of those expectations versus reality circumstances where you think it's going to turn out the way that the author shows it in the pictures and then it turns out looking completely different. Okay, so the first pattern that I reviewed is this Kittens wearing headphones pattern by Chubbies by Ash, and it was suggested to me by one of my followers. It was Chantel Perrone. And I made 3 of these little guys. They're all kind of differing in size, and I think that has to do with maybe the yarn being different brands of this velvet yarn and also just the way that I stuffed it. I think this gray one I stuffed really firmly, and also this gray velvet yarn is, I believe it's a Bernat velvet, whereas like the headphones and the face and all of that, that is all retro velvet by Premier yarns. And I'm not sure about the yellow or this brownish color, but they might be different velvets and that's why they came out in differing sizes. That could be one factor, but the other factor is just how much I stuffed it. And I can tell you just by feeling it that this one is a lot firmer, so there's probably a lot more stuffing in it, and this one's a lot squishier, so there's probably less stuffing in it. This is the last one I made. I made it without the headphones just so you can get an idea of what that looks like without the headphones. The headphones by themselves take 15 minutes to make, and then everything else, including the headphones, is about 50 minutes total to make this. So it is a fairly quick pattern. I was hoping that it would come out a little smaller. The creator of this pattern actually makes it up in acrylic yarn or something similar to that. It's not plush, chunky yarn like this is. In her video, they look like keychain sized little guys. So the first thing that I noticed was in round 1 of the headphones, there was a little bit of a miscommunication in the way that it was written, but it was still correct technically. It tells you to make 7 single crochets in a magic ring and then slip stitch, but it doesn't say slip stitch into the first single crochet that you made. It just says make a slip stitch. So if that was me, and I didn't understand how crochet normally works, I probably would have made a slip stitch into the magic ring instead of the first single crochet in that round. The next thing I noticed about the headphones instructions was that in round 2, it has an error written on screen. It says round 2, chain 1, 7V, 1 slip stitch, and a total of 14 stitches in the row. I think that 7V is meant to be 7 increases, not 7V. I think that's what she does in the video, but there is an error on screen, so if you're relying on just the text on screen instead of following along with the video and what she's saying as you crochet this little kitten, you probably would have been a little bit confused about why it said 7V instead of 7 increases. Next thing was the whiskers for the kitty's face. It doesn't show you or tell you where to place them or even how to do them. She does the embroidering of the nose and places her eyes, but she doesn't ever show you how to embroider the whiskers on. So that is something that it was a kind of weird to me. It is super simple to embroider whiskers on, but I'm sure some people might appreciate some guidance about where to place those, place your needle when you embroider those on. Next thing that I noticed, which isn't super obvious, but you notice after you stuff the kitty, is that one ear appears to be a little bit shorter than the other. And I was hoping it was just like that first one that I made, the yellow one, that maybe I just stuffed it weird, or maybe I attached the ears weird. But even after this was the third one that I made, I was still seeing some weird issue where this ear was shorter than the other. You can specifically see it a lot more obviously from the back side where this one is shorter than the other. I think it's just because of how you attach the ears to each other. Maybe if you attached them differently, you would have the end of the row face the same way or face in towards each other so that they're more symmetrical when you attach them to each other. There was only one typo that I spotted, and I already mentioned that, but other than that, it was really easy to understand. Her space in the video where she's crocheting is really clean and it's really clear and easy to see what she's doing. Didn't have any issues kind of seeing what she was doing in the video or anything like that, so that was really nice. And it was an awesome video to start out with for being my first YouTube free amigurumi pattern review. So that being said, I would give the pattern 4 stars out of 5. It's a pretty good pattern. It makes some really cute little kitties and headphones, and I'm sure that these will be a hit at markets. The next pattern that I reviewed for this video was the Year of the Dragon pattern by Ohana Crafts. And this was a fairly heavy sewing project. So all the things that you have to sew on are your horns, so 2 pieces there, the ears, so that's 4 pieces, your legs, and I believe that's it. So unless you count the whiskers. So the whiskers, you make a chain and then you thread it through, or actually it's not even a chain in her video, that's just what I ended up doing. She uses acrylic yarn, she pulls it through under each side of the nostril, and then she ties a knot real close to the plushie so that it can't come out of the plushie. But what I ended up doing was I made a chain, fastened off really close to either end of the chain, and then I tied a knot in the chain just like she did with the acrylic yarn after I pulled it through underneath the nostrils. Anyway, the things that you do not have to sew on are, for example, this spine. The spine is crocheted directly onto the body, as is the back of the tail, and then the gills, which are, they're not really gills, but the frills behind the ears that kind of come off of the horn. Those are also crocheted directly into the body. The body is created from the front of the head to the tail, so that's all one continuous piece, but other than that, it is a lot of small pieces that you have to make and then sew on later. The first kind of confusing thing in terms of terminology that she uses is she says 3 HTC capital B, which is short for 3 half double crochet bobble stitch, which is weird because when most people notate half double crochet, they don't say HTC, they say HDC because double doesn't start with a T, it starts with a D. That might just be because she's not a native English speaker. I sensed a little bit of an accent there, so it might be that, but it might also just be like an auto captioning issue, but I'm not completely sure. But having a 3 half double crochet bobble stitch as like a notation instead of just saying bobble stitch, because these are the only bobble stitches are the nostrils on the face here. That's the only time that you use it. So I don't completely understand why she tells you in the stitch itself and has such a long abbreviation for the stitch to make it a 3 half double crochet. I don't think having just like a normal whatever you would do for a bobble stitch would come out any differently. It would look the same, I think. The next thing I noticed at this point in the video was that the instructions that came on screen would occasionally just be a little bit weird. So in some circumstances, she would say 3 increases and not have a space between the 3 and the increase abbreviation, but in other cases it would have a space in between those. And it's a little confusing to, you know, your more seasoned crocheters, because in some instances that means something completely different in patterns. Sometimes in some people's patterns that means that you're supposed to do all 3 of those increases into the same stitch. And so that's why I kind of get a little bit frustrated when I see something like that. I know it was just a typo and that she meant you're just supposed to do 3 separate increases into 3 different stitches, but that can get a little bit confusing to people, especially if you're not super clear in your instructions and you're not super consistent about the way that you write your instructions. In row 10, there's a typo on screen, and you know that there's a typo on screen because it doesn't match what she says in the video. It says at the end of that row you're supposed to have 35 stitches, but you're really only supposed to have 25 stitches. That's what she says in her voiceover. So that is a huge discrepancy. Like I was saying earlier, for the previous pattern, if you're following a YouTube video for the pattern itself and not watching for whatever the content is, trying to go through it step by step with the pattern designer, that can be a little confusing, especially if you have to sit there and kind of watch and figure out what she meant to say. And even if, like, I can see that being a problem if it doesn't actually match up with what it was supposed to say either. So just make sure that when you're doing these tutorials that you make sure that your on-screen captions with the instructions for each row are as clear as day and that they make sense and that they are correct. Just proofread your stuff and that will save everybody a little bit of issue. So the next discrepancy was, I think it might have been because my dragon is not with burlap blanket yarn. She uses burlap blanket yarn, but this was made with Premier Parfait Chunky. And the discrepancy was that she says to place her eyes on row 5, but mine are not really on row 5. They're between 5 and 6. And I'm not sure if that's because of the size of this yarn being different, like the weight being different, or if they're actually supposed to be in between 5 and 6 and she just says place them on row 5. The next thing I noticed was rows 24 through 31 have errors in them, but she has a correction for those rows in the description for her video. So if you're planning on doing this pattern in the future, make sure you check the description for any errors that might be corrected down there. Another typo that I ran into was once you start making the ears, which are separate from the body, you make them separately. It says to make 2 half double crochets, but what she says in her voiceover is to make 3 half double crochets. So the last note that I ran into was at the very end of the video. She says you can add a belly button to your dragon, but this is not where she places the belly button to her dragon. It's very confusing, but she places it like past the end legs, which in my opinion would be more of a butthole, not a belly button. So I thought that was a little weird. I'm sure she meant for it to be a belly button, but really your belly button is in between your arms and your legs, not in between your legs and your tail. So if you want a butthole on your dragon, I suppose you can put a butthole on your dragon, but don't call it a belly button if it's not actually a belly button. That was just a little weird to me. That being said, this guy took me an hour and 30 minutes to make. It is a little bit of a more involved project because of all the things you have to make separately and then sew on, and all the things you have to crochet onto the body. I do think it came out really cute, and I think this will definitely be one of those show-stopping plushies that I can sell at markets and people will want to pick it up and look at it, especially since it's like bright red. I don't know if I see myself doing it in the future, just because it's so involved in having to watch a video, even though I transcribed it for myself so that I can like make it separately and not have to watch the video and make it as I go. Just having to figure out all those little problems that I ran into. And something else was when she places things on the body or tells you where to place them, she's not super exact. So for example, when you're about to sew on your horns to the head, she doesn't give you a row number. She says around this area and like just places it, I think she said around row 10 or something like that, and just places it on there. She doesn't tell you like how many stitches are in between. She just says, you know, place it, and she puts pins into it and just places it until it looks right. And that, for me, being wanting to make, when I make multiple plushies, I want them to all look very similar to each other, because there could be a situation where you make one way and then you make one another way, and people prefer the one of those plushies over the other because it looks a little bit more refined and a little bit better. So having really specific instructions about where to place things and where to sew them on and all that is really helpful to me specifically. I don't know if that's like a huge pet peeve to everybody, but it is definitely helpful to have specific instructions about where on the plushie you're supposed to put things. If you feel the same way about instructions not being super specific about things, definitely let me know in the comment section down below if you agree with me or if you disagree with me. It might just be a preference thing and people might feel differently. So always open to hearing what you guys think about my opinions. Anyway, I would give this pattern 3 stars out of 5. Next up, I made these little manta rays by Teresa's Crochet Shop. They take about 25 minutes to make, so they're very quick makes. The way that you make them is there's a top piece and a bottom piece, and then you single crochet them together, and then you add a tail at the end by just chaining off the end. You chain directly off the body and then slip stitch back down into the body and then fasten off. So very quick and easy to do. My only real note about this pattern is the way that it's written and the way that she does it in the video is that you make the main color, which is the top piece, first, and then you leave the loop open when you're done that piece, because you're gonna single crochet using that top color to make the border around the 2 pieces so that you attach them together. And my main gripe with that is like, why not just make the bottom piece first so that you wouldn't have an open loop open for so long and possibly have it get unraveled because you have, you know, yarn laying around. Maybe one of your pets like grabs it and unravels it or something like that on accident. So that's why I would recommend doing the bottom piece first. They're exactly the same thing. So maybe just start with your bottom color, fasten off, then do the top color, and then you can go directly into making the border around your little manta ray. That was my only note about this little guy, so I would give it 4.5 stars out of 5. The next pattern that I tested was these little jellyfish guys by 1 Cent Crochet, and I really liked this pattern a lot. The only real issue that I ran into when making these guys was that when she does make her tentacles, the tentacles are just chained off of the body itself, so it's a no-sew pattern. You know, I'm always excited about that too. So you just attach your yarn to the bottom of the body and then chain off of it, and then you increase all the way back down the chain into the body and then fasten off. My only note about the pattern is that when she does her chain, she doesn't tell you to start your increases in the second chain from your hook, which is basically like common knowledge to everybody. But if you're a beginner and you're crocheting for the first time, that might not be obvious to you. So instead of having, however, like say it's a chain of 8 and you're supposed to only increase into 7 of those stitches because you don't work into the stitch that's currently on your hook, she just tells you to increase into however many stitches instead of from the second chain from the hook, increase back down the chain. But yeah, these are really cute. They come out in under 40 minutes at 39 minutes total, and I just love how they turned out. I will note that she says to make like 5 or 6 tentacles, but for this first one I think I made like 10 tentacles just because of how closely I put them together. I ended up making more just to make sure that it filled all the space down there. For this one I think it's closer to the number of tentacles that she suggests you putting. So I would give this pattern 4.5 stars out of 5. It's a really good pattern. Next up, I made these no-sew baby axolotls by Crochet by Jenna, and I really enjoyed making this pattern. As you can see, I made 4 of them. I wanted to have a bunch of different axolotls to sell at markets, and I'm sure these will be a hit at markets. Axolotls, you know, kids really like them, some axolotls, so I made some in a bunch of different colors, and I was really happy about how this turned out. Fun fact, Crochet by Jenna is actually the creator that got me started selling at markets. I was just so inspired about what she was doing that I wanted to do it myself, and on top of that, making videos on YouTube again. I used to make videos on YouTube back in the day, but I never had like my niche or anything like that, so it was always kind of just random content that nobody wanted to watch. So thanks so much, Crochet by Jenna, for inspiring me to get back into the YouTube and making crochet plushies, because I had never made a crochet plushie before, but I just love making crochet plushies now. Anyway, my only note about her pattern was that she kind of goes through the steps kind of quickly, especially making your first round of single crochets. For people who don't know how to make a single crochet, it might be a little bit too quick the way that she does it to really get, you know, how to make a single crochet the first time around. But I suppose I think she does start the video out by saying it is like an advanced beginner pattern, so take that as you will. Anyway, I really enjoyed the pattern and I would give it 4.5 stars out of 5. So next up are the Little Birdie Friends by Annie Caraway Art. This is a pattern where there's like a bunch of different color variations that you can do to make different kinds of birds. So as you can see, I have like a little eagle here, I have a pigeon, I have a lovebird, and then I don't really know what the name of this kind of bird is, but it is like another one of, like, similar to the lovebird. It's like a pet bird that you can get. I don't know the name of it, but it is one of the examples of birds that she showed in her tester call on her Instagram page, or the announcement that she put out the tutorial on YouTube on her Instagram page. So I was just copying color combinations off of there. There's not necessarily notes or instructions on how to do these color modifications on the YouTube tutorial, which is my first note. That she says in the video that she was going to come out with different videos covering the different color variations that you can do, but she has never done that unless it's somewhere where you have to, you know, go behind a paywall to find or something like that. But I have not seen them. I was able to do them fairly easily just by looking at the photos that she provides on her Instagram to kind of copy the color scheme. Another thing was, I don't think there's a tutorial in the video. I might have missed it or something like that, but to do the little frill at the top of this birdie's head. But I just followed the same instructions as she has for the wings to make it, and I just crocheted it directly into the head after I finished assembling this little birdie guy. My next note about this pattern is that she doesn't tell you how many stitches you should have at the end of each row, and she goes through it fairly quickly. So for all of these patterns, I was transcribing them as I watched the video so that I could have a pattern that I can return to over and over again instead of having to watch the video over and over again. So I wrote these all out, and then I referred to those as I was crocheting these things so that I could watch other things while I was crocheting. That's what I normally do, is I put something on YouTube or Netflix or something like that so that I can have something to watch while I crochet. And what I was noticing as I was transcribing the instructions was, once she would finish reading off one instruction, she would basically be on to the next one. So it wasn't a lot of time to process what was happening on screen. And so that was most like my first note after, you know, the stitch count. And partially why I'm kind of upset about the stitch count not being on screen is because it becomes a little blurry at the end of the video about how many stitches you're supposed to have and where you're supposed to place stitches, and it kind of becomes muddled about what row you're actually on and stuff like that. So that is why I'm kind of being a stickler about how many stitches you're supposed to have. Another thing about how important having a stitch count at the end of your row is because you can check your work. So if you don't have the right amount of stitches, that might tell you that you messed up somewhere, and you added like an extra increase or an extra decrease, or you didn't do either of those things at all. And that will tell you if you are headed in the right direction, and the plushie will turn out looking like what it's supposed to look like. Luckily, the stitch count wasn't a huge issue, because once you get down to that muddy, blurry area where it's kind of hard to tell what you're supposed to be doing and what row is what row, it's like at the very end, and it's like one of the last couple rows, so it isn't a huge issue. You're finishing off the bird, it's gonna, you know, be closed regardless of how many stitches there are at the end of the row. So that wasn't a huge deal, but it could be a huge deal to somebody who might mess up somewhere and not know how many stitches are supposed to be in that row, so they won't be able to check their work and see what they did wrong without just completely frogging the whole thing and starting over. My next note is that these little wings, the combination of stitches that you use to make them, it's not super clear that you're supposed to do that in all one stitch when she says it. And I think it's partially because she said she had an issue reading that off, and she had recorded it like multiple times, so she was just gonna like copy and paste that voiceover for the next area where she where you do the same thing in the video. So that might be part of the issue and why the instruction there isn't super clear about it all being in one stitch. The next thing has to do with this little tail back here. At the end of row 13, she says you need to stop short, but she doesn't tell you how many stitches to stop short of, so you don't know how many stitches you have left over. She just tells you that the tail has to be centered on the back, and so the next stitches that you'll do will become the tail. And so you're supposed to have that kind of centered. So what I did was I put a stitch marker on where the first stitch of the tail was supposed to fall and where the last stitch of the tail was supposed to fall. That way I knew if it was going to be centered or not. So that was kind of helpful knowing. But it would have been more helpful to have the instructions say, this is how many stitches you should leave unworked of row 13, and then tell you to go ahead and follow the instructions. It was helpful to know that we're keeping the tail centered, and that's why we were leaving those stitches unworked, but it might be a little bit more helpful to just give us a number of stitches that you should leave unworked instead of just saying you'll leave some unworked. The next thing that was a little confusing was after you finish round 14, you finish with a bunch of invisible decreases, but she doesn't tell you when you shift into row 15. So once you shift into row 15, you're working into the back loops of the tail here. And assumedly, because the front loops of row 14 were done in row 14, I would assume that if you're working into the back loops of row 14, that you would actually be in row 15 at that point. But she doesn't include the crochet into the back loops of row 14 in the row 15 instructions, and she doesn't signify that that is a different row from row 14. Not a huge deal. It's mostly just like a technical pattern writing thing that kind of, it's another pet peeve. But I think it would make more sense to say that those stitches are in row 15 instead of row 14. That being said, I like how these little birdies turned out. She did say in her video that she sells out of these and people get really excited when they see the different little birdies. So that's why I ended up making all the different variations, because I hope people will like these little birdies and pick them up just because they see their like favorite bird displayed. So with that being said, I'd give this pattern 3.5 stars out of 5. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that these are satisfactory YouTube patterns to have picked out. I wanted to cover not like just one creator, if that makes sense. So I know that like Crochet by Jenna has multiple crochet tutorials, and One Cent Crochet also just has so many free tutorials on her YouTube, but I didn't want to cover like one creator more than the other creators, so that's why I only picked one of each creator's pattern. But I would love to do another YouTube pattern review in the future. So if you do have some YouTube patterns that you want me to try out, make sure you comment them down below, and I will make a note of that in my long list of crochet recommendations. You guys really came through in my last video when I asked for more recommendations, so thank you so much for that. Going forward, I do ask that if you are sharing YouTube suggestions, just comment them down in the comment section. And then if you're sharing Instagram patterns that you want me to review, just send them to my Instagram, and that way I'll have like a separate area where you're supposed to submit suggestions, and that'll make things easier for me, and hopefully that'll be easier for you as well. Anyway, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you give me a thumbs up and comment down below which of these patterns you are gonna try out for yourself. And if you guys like my content and you want to see more in the future, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And also, if you ring the bell, it'll give you a notification whenever I put out new content, whether that be scheduled content, I put out new videos every Tuesday, or unscheduled content, so surprise videos that you weren't expecting. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!